Thank you for joining me, everyone. Charles Moscowitz here. Is the Chabad Lubavitch movement involved in a conspiracy to control the world through the so-called Noahide laws? This is a contention by a lot of, I think, well-meaning young YouTube hosts. Now that I'm doing YouTube, I've become very aware of YouTube, and you get these young guys like Adam Green and Ryan Dawson and this guy from Boston, actually, my hometown. He wears a Boston Red Sox hat usually, and what's he calls himself Titus something. Um, and others who, they're hip guys. They're very nice looking guys. They have a huge following. In the case of Adam Green, I think he has 50,000, 60,000 followers, but they seem obsessed. I don't know if they'll. I would describe them as left wing or right wing either. I don't think that they. It's kind of a newer, younger, millennial thing, where they don't fly with either wing. um, but they have huge influence, and they're into this sort of conspiracy, this old conspiracy theories about Jews, particularly this idea that the Chabad movement is trying to take over the world, and that they're controlling the White House because Jared Kushner is secretly a Chabadnik. And, Adam Green went out with this video that became huge, which shows, Jared Kushner with the all-seeing eye attached to his forehead, and that he's the Antichrist, and that he's the secret, power broker in the White House trying to bring about Armageddon. Um, and I really feel compelled to respond to this. First of all, I have some knowledge of Chabad, not a lot, but back in the day when I was single living in the city of Boston and an unaffiliated Jew, I would go to the Chabad house for services for high holiday. I didn't feel comfortable going to a synagogue. I was, a single. I didn't have any particular connections, but I wanted to go somewhere for high holidays. And I kind of got to know the rabbi there, and eventually he presided over my wedding. And I've since then occasionally um, gone to Chabad events, very rarely, maybe once every 3 or 4 years. And so I have a kind of a cursory understanding of the Chabad. And my understanding is that it is a movement that is engaged in and has engaged in spiritual outreach to very secular Jews like myself at the time. People who are unaffiliated, and they're part of a kind of a missionizing movement to bring Jews back to Judaism and to bring Jews back to faith and knowing God and practice. And that their leader in the 1980s, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, who was a saintly rabbi, and I think we should note that the Chabad movement has probably done more than any other Jewish movement to help rescue Judaism after the Holocaust, at a time when Judaism had reached a very great, a big low. I mean, there was a huge drop of faith after that, and where was God? And there was it's a very, very hard time. The Chabad movement branched out all over the world, and they revived Judaism. It was kind of like a revivalist movement in the Protestant world, like the Second Awakening of Jonathan Edwards at the time of the American colonies. I mean, they say that his movement had a lot to do with rising the spiritual level of American Protestants to the degree that they were able to put a moral context into the revolution against the British, and other revivals of that nature. I think that the Wesleyan movement was a revival movement. There have been revivals in Catholicism. So, the Mendel Schneerson leadership of the Chabad led to a Jewish revival. And that did not necessarily mean that Jews became Hasidic, which is what the Chabad movement is. But they supported it. They supported it financially. They supported it in terms of going to an occasional event. And they were friends of the Chabad, as I consider myself to be. The problem arose when Schneerson and some of his immediate followers began to view him as a messianic figure. That created a huge controversy in Judaism, and it created a split in the Chabad movement itself after his death in, I think, 1995, around that time, when you have like the two schools within the Chabad movement. The one school which believes that Schneerson was a Messiah, the other school which doesn't. And you know, that's something where, you know, I mean, I would probably weigh in on the side of not being a Messiah. However, I don't doubt that Schneerson was a well-meaning man and a spiritual man, and that he did have messianic elements to him in terms of bringing back Judaism and uniting Judaism. And he was also one of the first modern advocates of the Noahide covenant. Now, this is another thing that, you know, these guys on the internet and Adam Green and these guys, that, oh, the Noahide covenant is secretly an attempt by the Zionists to take over the world. Quite the opposite. I mean, the Noahide covenant is 7 laws, the first one of which is that the peoples of the world are to establish their own sovereign nations. So how does that square with Israel trying to secretly control the world? Not at all. It's for the non-Jewish world. It's basically 7 principles that will bring about spirituality and faith to the non-Jewish nations. And it's asked them to reject idol worship and paganism and such basic principles as murder or theft. In a way, I mean, maybe an advanced look at a Noahide covenant would be the Magna Carta of the English, which technically I believe is still the law of the land in the United States. It was a general view of what is the proper behavior of a society. It was a statement that was not to be ever implemented by force. Maybe it was only in the case of the English crown. But with the Noahide covenant, it's not something that is implemented by force. It is something that the Jewish people teach to the rest of the world as part of a universal understanding of moral and ethical code. And also my understanding is that the Noahide covenant is incorporated into Christianity, because when St. James sent or agreed to allow Paul of Tarsus, Paul the evangelist, to launch his evangelism in the Roman Empire and to travel throughout the Roman Empire teaching Christianity and issuing his epistles, before he left Israel, or Judea at the time, he agreed to incorporate the Noahide covenant into the text. So, you know, the Noahide covenant is not a governing text for a world government. It is a set of moral precepts by which we hope that nations of the world embrace, and I support that. I also would just conclude by pointing out that, as far as I can tell, unless someone can show me evidence otherwise, which I'm open to, the Chabad movement is nothing more than, and nothing less than, a spiritual revival movement that is on an outreach mission to the Jewish people, to try to bring the Jewish people back to the covenant, back to knowing God, back to, you know, observing the moral and ethical precepts of the Torah. Nothing more and nothing less. Anyway, again, thanks for joining me today. Chuck Moscowitz. Check out my books on Amazon, and please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great day, everybody.